In 1899, the world's greatest discovery of Neanderthal man was excavated in a sandy cave at Krapina, Croatia. A spectacular collection of broken human and animal fossil remains. But hundreds of the human bones showed mysterious cut marks and signs of possible butchery.
Here you have a nice evidence of cut marks.
Was this a site of a terrible massacre, tribal warfare, or evidence of one of the most controversial human practices, cannibalism?
Well, did they eat each other?
I think now and then they probably did.
For centuries, these remains have hidden vital clues about the nature and fate of the Neanderthals, these mysterious Paleolithic predecessors to modern man. Jill Cook, archaeologist and deputy keeper of prehistory in Europe at the British Museum, recently returned to Krapina to investigate and re-examine the evidence. Using new technologies and expert analysis, her investigation discovers hidden evidence to challenge existing theories on cannibalism and Neanderthals.
This is really something.
Jill Cook is returning to Krapina, Croatia, to re-examine one of the most intriguing mysteries in the development of the human species. New forensic analysis of the hundreds of broken Neanderthal bone remains may reveal vital clues, not just about the nature of Neanderthals and cannibalism, but about human evolution itself. Hidden amidst the Croatian mountains lay the clues to one of the fiercest anthropological debates of the century. The very name Neanderthal has always conjured up a derogatory image, a byword for all that is barbaric, sluggish, brutal, and intellectually backward. But did these ancient people deserve their reputation? Jill decides to begin her journey with a visit to Zagreb's Natural History Museum, home of the collection and founder of modern paleontology, Gorjanović Kramberger. Kramberger was a geologist as well as a paleontologist. He caused a sensation back in 1899 when he claimed he found the remains of the brutish, unsophisticated ancestors of modern man in the Krapina caves. While that theory is now accepted, it was his claim that our predecessors were cannibalistic that is still hotly debated in more recent times.
There was a great deal of scepticism about whether cannibalism had actually ever taken place, whether it was just something really rather terrible that we could say about people in the past to prove that we were so much more evolved and sophisticated. So I wanted to come back and look at the sample that had started it all.
Recent scientific age estimates by the museum has confirmed the bones are Neanderthal, dated over 100,000 years old. Jill begins her investigation with a visit to Kramberger's study. The man who originally found the bones meticulously kept records of them. She meets with Jakov Radovšić, archaeologist and curator of the Zagreb Museum. He is the world's leading authority on the Krapina collection.
Right, and this is his handwriting, is it?
This is his handwriting.
He takes Jill through Kramberger's own record of the find.
Let's say, for instance, this is September 1st. He goes to Krapina to collect human remains and rhino remains.
Finding the remains of animals long since extinct in Europe, alongside the human fossils, made Kramberger realize just how ancient and important these human remains were. Neanderthal remains had been found before, but it was the scale of the find that was so impressive.
In 6 years of excavations, he found 900 skeletal fragments.
900?
It's thought that roughly 900 fragments could represent the remains of up to 80 people. It was the fact that the bones were smashed apart that made Kramberger over 100 years ago seize on the idea that something macabre was going on.
So he somehow, since the very beginning, he had the idea that this might be evidence of cannibalism.
So he seems to have been quite keen to see a dark side of human nature in a way.
Yeah.
But had Kramberger been too hasty in reaching his conclusions? Jill needs to find out what Neanderthals were really like. She makes the hour-long journey from Zagreb to the caves at Krapina to take a look at the site for herself. She's hoping this will help her assess whether or not cannibalism could have been part of their nature. She has decided to invite anthropologist David Freyer to join her investigations. He is keen to dispel the myth that Neanderthals were brutish creatures.
120,000 years ago, you would meet a Neanderthal walking up here.
David explains that Neanderthals were far more sophisticated than people imagine.
They were very interesting people. You know, they did lots of different things, some which we don't give them credit for, because we have this image of Neanderthals as being fools and simpletons, and look at the expression on their faces of these.
Yeah.
Or over here. I mean,
Yeah.
I've looked at a lot of pictures of Neanderthals, and they're never smiling. I mean, they're always depicted as
Yeah.
sad look. But you know, they had all these capacities. You look at their tools. I mean, they're complex tools. They're not something that's just throwing a rock against a wall and getting a flake. They're very sophisticated in their production.
Contrary to their popular image as dim-witted brutes, Neanderthals were closer to modern humans than often assumed. These precursors of modern man lived between about 130,000 and as recent as 28,000 years ago, surviving well in a range of environments stretching across Europe as far as the Middle East. Tough and rugged hunter-gatherers, they knew how to capture and kill their prey. And above all, the evidence suggests, from the cut marks found on animal bones, they were master butchers. It's a similarity of butcher marks on Neanderthal bones that have alerted archaeologists to the possibility of cannibalism. But there seems little evidence of intertribal warfare, and Neanderthals were not known to have an aggressive nature. Could it be that members of the same group were eating each other?
I think a lot of those bones that represented people knew each other.
Yeah.
They probably talked to each other.
Yeah.
Contrary to the reconstructions, they probably laughed and
Yeah.
smiled at
Yeah.
each other when they
Yeah.
saw each other coming up the valley and
Yeah.
hooting to each other, whatever.
Well, did they eat each other?
No. Who knows for sure? You know, it's really hard to tell. You can see
But what do
these
you
marks.
think?
I think now and then they probably did.
So even David, a keen believer that Neanderthals are more sophisticated than we give them credit for, can't rule out the possibility of cannibalism. Jill needs to take a look at the bones for herself to determine whether or not this brutal practice took place.
Here we have some samples to demonstrate the issue of.
Yakov talks her through the finds from Krapina at the museum, starting with a skull fragment.
This is a left parietal bone, which goes straight here, and here you have a nice evidence of cut marks.
This looks like someone has been trying to cut away at the temporal muscle.
It's the muscle that
Very
makes our jaws
yeah,
work, and
exactly.
it's a very tough muscle, isn't
It's a
it?
very tough muscle, yeah.
What might have motivated such butchery? Jill has a grisly explanation.
One can understand that they might want to cut through that muscle, perhaps to get at delicacies like the tongue, to get the jaw off, and then detach the tongue, perhaps to eat it, and then through the back of the head into the brain as well.
The brain may have been an important source of nutrition, as would bone marrow.
Now you have these long bones, you see.
The leg bones seem to have been deliberately split and chipped, perhaps to get at the bone marrow inside.
With this, for many people, this is a good argument for extraction of marrow.
So there does seem to be some evidence of cannibalism, but Jill remains to be convinced. She draws Yakov's attention to some marks on the key exhibit of the collection, the famous sea skull, the skull of a Neanderthal teenager, the prize piece which has become an icon of prehistory. It is in extremely good condition, considering it is over 100,000 years old.
When we look at this skull, and see the marks here, these marks don't make any sense because there's no flesh.
Since there's no flesh on this part of the head, then cannibalism for food has to be ruled out. Similarly, some of the other marks on the bones don't tie up with the notion of cannibalism. Another bone fragment from the back of the skull highlights another contradiction.
It's a right parietal, and it goes right here. It goes right here, back of your skull, at this position, and you could see that this person had a serious injury, and
Yes.
and you will see that that this injury healed.
This degree of injury could have left the person in a coma for days. It would have been highly unlikely that they would have survived without having been cared for by others. This caring nature doesn't fit in with what we know about Neanderthals. Jill seems to be faced with conflicting evidence highlighted by the investigation.
We've got one set of evidence which suggests that the bodies are being cut up and possibly used for food. And yet we've got another set of evidence which says these people are caring and respectful of one another, which in many respects contradicts our usual view of Neanderthal life.
So were Neanderthals brutal or caring? And if they were caring, how do you explain the evidence of cannibalism, given that X-rays of the bones, especially of the teeth, indicate there was no sign of starvation or lack of nutrition? David has an interesting theory.
There's something going on probably other than subsistence cannibalism, but they were clearly cutting up meat off of bones and breaking bones open. So maybe they were preparing the bones, stripping the bones of sinew, and this is a way of defleshing, the spiritual type of body preparation.
The defleshing may not have been for food, but could have been part of a ritual preparation of the bones themselves. However, Jill thinks that the flesh may still have been eaten as part of this ritual.
That suggests some quite respectful response to the dead.
Yeah, sure.
And it may be that the ritual involved in burial also involved eating some of the flesh. It might have not represented lunch, but it might have represented some very spiritual way.
A communion or something.
A communion, yes.
Sure.
If there had been some sort of burial ritual, this indicates a remarkable level of sophisticated behavior, even spirituality, not normally associated with Neanderthals. Were the Neanderthals simply brutish cannibals, or was there something more profound going on? Perhaps modern technology will shed new light.
Look.
And this is really something.
Archaeologist Jill Cook is on an investigation. She's trying to find out whether the damage evident on bones found in the Krapina caves of Croatia revealed cannibalism amongst Neanderthals. She's investigating a more straightforward explanation for the fragmentation of the bones, whether a rock fall was to blame.
It's great to have a reminder about the nature of the site and the nature of the rock. To see on a frosty day how the sandstone is dropping off the side of the cliff. Now this is really quite important because it means that the remains that were under the rock overhang were actually covered quite gently. So theories about big rocks falling down and breaking bones are not a possibility.
So the breaking up of the bones can't be explained by geological factors, but perhaps the scratch marks can be. Yakov has joined Jill to try to figure this out.
It is my understanding that this type of soil could affect the surface of this bone.
So if the bones were buried under this coarse and gritty soil, and then humans or animals had trampled over it, it could have resulted in the scratch marks.
The quality of this sediment or quartz grains could leave some scratches on the surface of the bone. What do you think?
I think that's certainly true.
So some of the marks then could have a more innocent explanation than cannibalism. If the bones were trampled underfoot, it is conceivable that the dead were buried in the very cave in which the Neanderthals were living.
Would they actually be living in amongst these buried remains?
I think so, yeah. Why not?
So it'd be like having the ancestors with you, really?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
So here we have another indication of tenderness or respect for the dead, a desire to live alongside them, and something that seems to contradict conventional notions of cannibals. Having listened to expert opinion and tested various theories, Jill is far from reaching any conclusions. She decides to return again to Kramberger's library, the paleontologist who first excavated the bones at Krapina at the turn of the century, to weigh up her options.
Well, it's clear that we've got some natural damage here. Scratches that have happened because of bones moving around in a very gritty deposit or being trampled on by animals. There's also the cut marks, and when you put the cut marks with that damage, again it looks as if that might steer us in the direction of cannibalism.
Jill also needs to consider potential contradictions, the evidence of caring within the Neanderthal communities, and the possibility of ritual ceremonial behaviour.
So if we were to think about this as some careful ritual, perhaps with meanings of a spiritual or symbolic kind, this really contradicts our view of this brutish creature living in a cave. We're, in many respects, much happier to think of these people eating one another than caring for one another. Perhaps that's our problem, perhaps that's what we've got to resolve.
For Jill, her time in Zagreb is nearly over. She's left wondering whether her interpretation of the facts is accurate. Is she being prejudiced by preconceived notions of Neanderthals? She's managed to persuade Olympus, Croatia to lend the museum a high-definition, digitally enhanced microscope so they can attempt to get some definitive answers.
Well, we're certainly looking at a piece of bone that's had a really hard life. There's a break there and a mass of tiny little marks.
This is the very first time that the Krapina collection has been examined using the latest technology of high-powered computer imaging.
You're not actually cutting through anything sensible there. You're not taking a fillet off, or you're not stripping off any muscle.
The forensic detail is suddenly full of revelations.
It's quite long, isn't it? But it's going in the right direction.
The size, the depth, and most important of all, the regular pattern drawn are full of clues.
You've got a very fine mass of marks right in the middle of the bone, and again that would suggest natural scratching.
The scientists are systematically assessing each bone to gauge whether they have sustained cut marks, scratch marks, or abrasions.
I argue that these are cut marks.
I think so too, yeah. Just wondering, starting to wonder if it's a chop mark as we go a little bit higher on the magnification.
Jill then takes a closer look at the scratch marks on the icon of the collection, the sea skull, the amazingly well-preserved skull of an adolescent female. Almost as soon as the lab technician lines up the skull, the reaction from the scientists is one of pure amazement.
There we go.
Oh, that's
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Look. Oh.
They don't seem to be able to believe what they are seeing. Jill has always taken the scratches to be erosion marks caused by the gritty soil. But the images she sees on the screen make her completely change her mind.
Well, I'm sorry to say they're cut marks, aren't they?
No,
we can't get away from that one, can we?
Yeah, no. That's so. This is incredible. Have you seen this?
The scientists are beginning to realize they've made an incredible discovery.
This is really something.
Now, for the first time, the scientists can see clearly that these marks were made very deliberately and firmly. There is something very special going on here.
Isn't it? How regularly they're spaced.
Yeah. And definitely I think this is a human activity. It's not, sediment action or movement of that bone during fossilization or something. So this is a human action.
Definitely. Yeah.
For me, this is the most astonishing piece.
What the scientists are seeing are deliberate cut marks, but on the back of the young female skull where there's no flesh.
There is something unusual about this. You're not achieving anything as far as food is concerned. So this is something different. This is deliberate human activity, but for what reason, we can only begin to speculate.
For Jill, these deliberate cut marks are clear evidence that Neanderthals carried out rituals on their dead. A degree of sophisticated behavior has come as a true revelation.
My thoughts are in turmoil because I have always tended towards the view that more sophisticated ideas and the capacity for abstract thought is something that does come with fully modern people. Now I'm looking at something that challenges me.
And even Yakov, who has lived amongst these fragments for over 30 years, seems genuinely surprised and excited.
For me, it's a discovery. For me, knowing this collection very well, this is a real, new image.
Yes.
It's a discovery.
Yeah.
This will be taught at universities everywhere.
For Jill, the marks on the sea skull are key to her investigation. She has reached a dramatic conclusion, casting new light on the nature of Neanderthals.
To find on the top of her head a series of very clear, very deliberate marks arranged in a way that suggests that someone sat with her skull in their lap and marked the top of it with a stone tool is quite emotional, really. It gives you a sense that there was enormous respect for a relative, perhaps an ancestor.
Far from brutish, Neanderthals may well have been seen to have been thoughtful and caring beings. And yet some of the evidence she's seen, such as the deliberately smashed bones and the cuts around the temporal muscles, possibly to get to the tongue or brain, has forced her to admit that cannibalism did take place.
I've always been sceptical about cannibalism and very cautious about how to interpret the evidence for it. And I've certainly seen in my journey here things that have opened my eyes and made me revise some of my opinions.
It's the motive for the cannibalism that's the real surprise. Whether or not they were eating their relatives for lunch or out of respect, we may never know. But what is undeniable is that the marks on the sea skull will bring about a new chapter in the study of Neanderthals and the way they treated their dead.